11 years ago, they buried a ghost. Tonight, I return to my sister's wedding, ready to exhume a family's darkest secrets. The air was thick with the scent of hydrangeas and money. It clung to the crisp, late afternoon breeze that drifted across the manicured lawns of the country club, a place I hadn't set foot in since I was a boy. Fairy lights were already beginning to glow in the twilight, strung between ancient oak trees, casting a soft, dreamy haze over the whole affair. Laughter, light and carefree, floated from the veranda, punctuated by the clinking of champagne flutes. It was a perfect scene, a storybook wedding for a storybook couple. My sister Sarah deserved nothing less, and I, the ghost at the feast, was here to watch it all unfold. 11 years. It felt like a lifetime. In that time, the boy they all knew had died, and a man they would never recognize had been forged in his place. The reflection that stared back at me in the polished glass of the clubhouse door was a stranger, even to me sometimes. The jaw was stronger, the hair darker and cut short, a stark contrast to the lanky, floppy-haired teenager I'd been. A well-tailored suit, the kind my father always insisted a man should wear, hung on a frame that was broader, harder. I'd spent a decade building this new person, this Alex, brick by painful brick. He was confident, he was successful, he was a friend of the groom. A convenient fiction that had gotten me through the door. Leo, on the other hand, Leo was a tragedy, a cautionary tale whispered at family gatherings, the son who had run away, the brother who had vanished, the boy who broke his parents' hearts and was presumed long dead. My hands, tucked into my pockets, were clenched into tight fists. My knuckles were white. It was a nervous habit I'd never quite managed to break. I scanned the crowd, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. And then I saw them. My parents. My father stood tall and imposing, his silver hair immaculate, his posture as rigid as ever. He was holding a glass of scotch, laughing at something a business associate said, but his eyes didn't share the mirth. They were the same cold, calculating eyes that had watched me pack my bag that final night. My mother stood beside him, a portrait of fragile elegance in a pale blue dress. She looked older, the fine lines around her eyes deeper than I remembered. She was smiling, but it was a brittle, practiced thing. The genuine, radiant smile I remembered from my childhood was gone, another casualty of the night, everything shattered. Seeing them felt like a physical blow, winding me. For a moment I was 16 again, standing in my father's study, the air crackling with fury. I could almost hear his voice, low and venomous, telling me I was a disappointment, that if I walked out that door, I would no longer be his son. I had called his bluff. I had walked, and I had never looked back. Until now. My gaze shifted, searching, and then it found her. Sarah. She was standing near the grand flower-draped archway where they'd said their vows. She was breathtaking. The white dress seemed to glow, and her smile was real. It reached her eyes, crinkling the corners just like it used to when we shared a secret. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a picture of pure, unadulterated joy. And standing beside her, his arm possessively around her waist, was the groom. Mark. I'd done my research. He was a corporate lawyer, from a good family, handsome in a bland, conventional way. He looked like the kind of man my father would have designed in a lab to marry his daughter. A surge of conflicting emotions washed over me, an immense aching love for the sister I'd left behind, a fierce pride in the beautiful woman she'd become, and a bitter, acidic resentment that I couldn't be a part of it. I had missed everything. Her high school graduation, her first heartbreak, her college years, the day this man proposed to her. I was a phantom, watching my own life through a window. Gorgeous, isn't it? They make a lovely couple. The voice startled me. I turned to see a woman in her late 50s, a familiar face I couldn't quite place, smiling at me. Her name came to me a second later. Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister. She was rounder, her hair a brassy shade of blonde I didn't recognize, but the same inquisitive, bird-like eyes were there. "They do," I managed to say, my voice sounding rougher, deeper than I intended. Years of consciously lowering my register had paid off. "I don't believe we've met," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Carol, Sarah's aunt." "Alex," I replied, shaking her hand. My palm was slick with sweat. "A friend of Mark's. From work." "Oh, a lawyer. How wonderful," she chirped, her eyes scanning my suit with approval.
"It's just such a perfect day. A little bittersweet, of course." I raised an eyebrow. "How so?" She leaned in conspiratorially, her perfume overpowering. "Well, you know, with Sarah's brother not being here. Leo. It's the one dark cloud on this whole day. My sister, bless her heart. She puts on a brave face, but I know she's thinking of him. We all are. Such a tragedy. My throat tightened. Tragedy? I asked, feigning ignorance. I'm sorry. I don't think Mark ever mentioned— Aunt Carol waved a dismissive hand. Oh, the family doesn't talk about it with outsiders. It's all very hush, hush. He ran away when he was just a teenager, a troubled boy. Got into a terrible fight with his father. My brother-in-law can be a very difficult man, and just vanished. It's been over a decade now. Most of us assumed the worst happened. It nearly destroyed my sister. I just nodded, my insides churning. A troubled boy. That was the narrative they'd settled on. It was cleaner, easier than the truth. It painted me as the villain and them as the victims.
You know, she said, squinting at me, her head tilted. It's funny. From this angle you have a look of him. Around the eyes. Leo had the same intense stare. Ice flooded my veins. I forced a polite, empty smile. A common face, I suppose. I suppose, she conceded, her attention already drifting back to the crowd. But her words lingered, clinging to me like smoke. I needed to get out of there. This was a mistake. I had thought I could handle it, that I could see her, see them, and leave, the curiosity that had gnawed at me for years finally satisfied. But being here was like pressing on a deep, infected wound. All the pain, all the rage I thought I had buried was bubbling to the surface. I turned to leave, to melt back into the shadows and disappear for another 11 years. But as I turned, I found my path blocked. It was my father. He was standing right in front of me, his scotch glass held loosely in his hand. He had broken away from his conversation and was staring at me, not with the casual disinterest he gave to strangers, but with an unnerving, piercing focus. The polite smile on my face felt like a cheap mask. "I don't believe we've been introduced," he said, his voice the same deep baritone that had haunted my nightmares. It was smooth, controlled, but with an undercurrent of steel. "Alex," I said, my heart pounding in my ears. "Friend of the groom." He didn't offer his name. He didn't need to. He just continued to study my face, his cold eyes missing nothing. An eternity seemed to pass in the silence between us. I could feel Aunt Carol watching. Her curiosity piqued. Then a flicker of something crossed his face. Not recognition. Something far more unsettling. It was a look of cold, analytical assessment. He took a small step closer, his gaze locked on mine. "Forgive me for staring," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "It's just— you remind me of someone." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. "It's my son. My late son. You have his eyes. My late son." The words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence in my head. He had declared me dead. To the world, to his family, to himself. It was a cleaner narrative, I supposed. A tragic loss was far more socially acceptable than an heir who had rejected everything his father stood for. The coldness of it was breathtaking. He wasn't grieving. He was managing a story. My story. And now he was using my ghost to unnerve a stranger who happened to have my eyes. I kept my expression neutral, a mask of polite sympathy I had perfected over years of corporate negotiations. "I'm very sorry for your loss, sir," I said, my voice steady. "It must be difficult, especially on a day like today." His eyes, chips of gray flint, narrowed almost imperceptibly. He was weighing my response, searching for a crack in the facade. "Difficult doesn't begin to cover it," he said, taking a slow sip of his scotch. "You lose a child, you lose a part of yourself. He was volatile, headstrong, made some foolish choices. But he was my son. The hypocrisy was a physical thing, a bitter taste at the back of my throat. He spoke of me as if I were a failed investment, a stock that had plummeted. He hadn't lost a son. He had discarded one. "I can't imagine," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. I needed to end this. I gave a slight nod. "If you'll excuse me, I should probably—" "Where are you from, Alex?" he cut in, his tone casual, but his gaze was anything but. "Chicago," I answered without hesitation. It was part of the backstory. Alex was a transplant. A corporate shark moved in by the firm a few years ago. No local ties, no history. "Family still there?" "No," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "They passed away some time ago. Car accident." The lie was old and well-worn, a comfortable armor. It was also a perfect conversation killer. Most people mumbled their condolences and backed away, unwilling to tread on such tragic ground. But my father was not most people. Instead of sympathy, a strange, calculating look crossed his features. "I see," he said slowly, as if filing the information away. A man on his own, I can appreciate that. It takes a certain kind of strength to build a life from scratch. Was that a threat? A warning? Or some twisted backhanded compliment? Before I could decipher it, a musical laugh cut through the tension. "Daddy, stop interrogating Mark's friends. You'll scare them all away." It was Sarah. She was gliding towards us, her face flushed with happiness, her hand now linked with Mark's. Up close, she was even more radiant. I could smell the faint scent of her perfume, the same freesia and pear scent she'd worn in high school. The sensory memory hit me with the force of a tidal wave, and for a terrifying second, I felt my composure crack. I was 16 again, standing in the hallway while she got ready for a dance, the whole house smelling of that perfume. "Sarah, darling," my father said, his demeanor shifting instantly to that of a doting patriarch. "I was just getting to know Alex. He works with your new husband." "Alex! It's so good to finally meet you," Sarah said, her smile so genuine it was a physical pain. "Mark talks about you all the time. The deal-closing machine, he calls you." "He exaggerates," I said, forcing a chuckle. My eyes met hers, and my carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. They were the same eyes I saw in my own reflection, our mother's eyes, but hers were clear, bright, and full of a light I was sure I'd lost long ago. There was no flicker of recognition. None at all. I was just another suit, another face in the crowd. The relief was as sharp as the disappointment. "Nonsense," Mark said, clapping me on the shoulder. "This guy's a legend. Glad you could make it, man." "Wouldn't have missed it," I lied smoothly. "We were just talking, darling," my father interjected, his voice slick as oil. "About resemblances. Don't you think Alex has a familiar look about him? Around the eyes?" Sarah's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She tilted her head, her gaze becoming more focused as she studied my face. For one heart-stopping moment, I was sure she saw it. I saw her brow furrow in concentration, a flicker of confusion in the depths of her gaze. It was as if her memory was trying to claw its way through 11 years of absence, through the changes in my face, to find the boy she once knew. My heart hammered against my chest, each beat a deafening drum. "Don't see me. Please, don't see me." Then she gave a little shake of her head, the moment passing. "I don't know, Daddy," she said with a light laugh, dismissing it. "I guess so. Maybe he looks a little like that actor, the one from that spy movie." She turned her brilliant smile back to me. "I'm so sorry. My father has a terrible habit of finding dead ringers for people everywhere he goes." "It's no problem at all," I said, feeling the sweat on my back turn cold. I had survived. I had passed the test. My father was still watching me, that unreadable expression on his face. The orchestra on the veranda started playing a slow, romantic ballad. Mark took Sarah's hand. "They're playing our song. Come on, we have to dance." He led her away, and she glanced back over her shoulder, giving me a final, friendly wave. I stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling utterly drained. The confrontation, brief as it was, had taken everything out of me. I watched my sister, my beautiful, happy, stranger of a sister, melt into her husband's arms on the dance floor. The fairy lights twinkled, the music swelled, and I had never felt so alone. I needed a drink, a real one. I turned away from my father without another word, not caring if it was rude, and made a beeline for the open bar set up by the French doors. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline starting to fade, leaving a hollow tremor in its wake. "Double scotch." "Neat," I told the bartender, my voice raspier than before. He nodded and turned to grab a bottle. As I waited, leaning against the polished mahogany, I felt a presence beside me. I didn't look, assuming it was another guest waiting for a drink. "You know, for 11 years I wondered." The voice was female, low and familiar. A voice I hadn't heard since it belonged to a girl with braces and pigtails. A voice I would have known anywhere. My blood ran cold. I turned my head slowly, my heart seizing in my chest. It was Chloe, Sarah's best friend, her maid of honor. She was staring at me, not with the friendly curiosity of the other guests, but with a chilling, absolute certainty. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, raked over my face. "I wondered what you'd look like," she continued, her voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the noise of the party like a knife. "If you were even alive. But I never forgot the little things." I opened my mouth to speak, to deny, to play the part of Alex the stranger, but she held up a hand, stopping me before I could utter a sound. "Don't bother," she said, her gaze dropping from my eyes down to my hand, which was resting on the bar. You can get surgery to change your nose, you can put on muscle, you can deepen your voice, but you can't change your tells. She looked back up, her eyes locking onto mine, and delivered the final, devastating blow. You still rub your thumb over your index finger when you're lying. You did it the entire time you were talking to your father. The bartender placed the heavy glass of scotch on the bar in front of me. The clink of crystal on wood sounded like a gunshot in the sudden, roaring silence that had enveloped me. My hand, the one she'd been watching, froze mid-rub. She was right. It was a nervous tic I'd had since childhood, something I thought I'd buried along with Leo. A subconscious betrayal. My carefully constructed identity, the one I had spent a decade building, had been dismantled in seconds by a ghost from a past I thought was dead and buried. Chloe's face was a mask of conflicting emotions. There was shock, yes, but underneath it, there was a simmering anger and a deep, profound sadness. This wasn't the bubbly, carefree Chloe I remembered. Life had sharpened her edges, just as it had mine. "What are you doing here, Leo?" she whispered, her voice tight with a tension that mirrored my own. She used my name, my real name, and hearing it out loud after so long felt like being struck by lightning. It was alien, and yet more fundamentally me than Alex could ever be. I picked up the glass, my fingers trembling slightly, and took a large swallow of the scotch. It burned a welcome trail down my throat, a searing heat that momentarily distracted from the ice water in my veins. "It's Alex," I said, my voice low and hard, a pathetic attempt at denial. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Don't. Just don't. You can lie to them. You can lie to yourself, but you can't lie to me. I spent half my childhood at your house. I watched you perfect that little nervous habit while your father lectured you about your grades. I saw you do it right before you kissed me behind the bleachers in 10th grade. The memory slammed into me, unbidden and unwelcome. A warm summer evening, the smell of cut grass, the dizzying feeling of a first kiss. It was a memory from another life, belonging to another boy. A boy Chloe clearly hadn't forgotten. I turned to face her fully, my back to the crowded veranda. In the dim light of the bar, we were in our own isolated world. "Why haven't you said anything?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why not just walk over to Sarah and point me out?" "And do what?" she shot back, her eyes flashing. "Ruin her wedding day? The one day she's allowed to be completely, selfishly happy, without the shadow of her lost brother hanging over everything. Is that what you came here to do? To drop a bomb in the middle of her life and walk away again?" Her words were sharp, each one a perfectly aimed dart. And they hit their mark, because deep down, I didn't know why I had come. I had told myself it was for closure, to see that she was happy and then disappear forever. But now, standing here, exposed and raw, I knew that was a lie. I had come because a part of me, a small, foolish part, wanted to be seen. I just never expected it to be by her. "No," I said, my voice ragged. "That's not why I'm here." "Then why are you?" she pressed, taking a step closer. 11 years, Leo. Not a word. Not a letter, not an email, not a single sign that you were alive. Sarah cried for a year straight. Your mother, she aged a decade overnight. Do you have any idea what you did to them?" "I know what he did to me," I retorted, the old anger flaring up, hot and familiar. "You think I wanted to leave? I was 16. He gave me an ultimatum. His way or the highway. Conform or be disowned. He didn't want a son, Chloe. He wanted a mirror. And I wasn't reflecting the image he wanted. So you just vanished?" she said, her voice laced with disbelief. "You punish Sarah and your mom for his sins? That's your justification?" "It's not a justification, it's a fact," I snapped, then lowered my voice, conscious of the bartender glancing our way. "I had nothing. $17 and a backpack. I did what I had to do to survive. And you have no idea what it's like to live every day knowing your own father would rather believe you're dead than admit you exist on your own terms." We stared at each other, the space between us crackling with 11 years of unspoken words, of anger, grief, and a shared history that refused to stay buried. Her expression softened slightly, the hard anger in her eyes giving way to a flicker of the girl I used to know. "She missed you," Chloe said quietly, her voice losing its edge. "Every birthday, every Christmas. She would set a place for you at the table, just in case. Your dad would get furious, but your mom would let her. She did it until she went off to college. The image of that empty chair, that symbol of pathetic, misplaced hope, was a gut punch. I had to look away, focusing on the amber liquid in my glass. The weight of my decision, the true collateral damage, pressed down on me, heavy, and suffocating. "What do you want, Chloe?" I finally asked, my gaze still fixed on the glass. "I want to know what you're going to do," she said. "Are you going to stay in the shadows and watch like a ghost? Or are you going to blow this family apart all over again?" I finished the scotch in one last fiery gulp and placed the empty glass on the bar. I looked back at her, the alcohol doing little to numb the turmoil inside me. "I'm going to leave," I said, the decision solidifying as I spoke it. "This was a mistake. I've seen her. She's happy. That's all I needed." I started to turn away, to walk out of her life as suddenly as I had walked back into it. "It's not that simple," she said, her hand darting out and grabbing my arm. Her touch was electric, a jolt of memory and connection that I was not prepared for. "You can't just leave now. Not like this." "Watch me," I said, trying to pull my arm away, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "Leo, wait," she said, her voice urgent. "There's something you don't know, something that happened after you left, about your dad, about his business." I paused, turning back to her. A cold dread, separate from the fear of being discovered, began to creep up my spine. Chloe's eyes were wide, her expression deadly serious. "What about his business?" She hesitated, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that sent a chill through me. "Mark isn't just some random lawyer Sarah fell in love with," she said, her grip on my arm tightening. "Your father chose him. He orchestrated their entire relationship. Mark's father is a federal judge, and our father, Leo, he's been under investigation by the SEC for the last 3 years. The music from the veranda seemed to warp and fade, replaced by a low hum in my ears. An SEC investigation. A federal judge. Mark! The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. My father wasn't just controlling his daughter's life, he was using her. Sarah's storybook wedding wasn't a celebration of love. It was a strategic merger, a corporate alliance designed to shield him from the consequences of his own corruption. The cold, calculating man who had discarded his son was now using his daughter as a pawn in a high-stakes game I couldn't begin to comprehend. "He's buying protection," I said, the words coming out as a choked whisper. It all made sense, the extravagant wedding, the carefully selected groom, my father's almost manic insistence on everything being perfect. This wasn't a party. It was a performance, a public display of untouchable power and influence. Chloe nodded, her eyes dark with a grim understanding. "No one talks about it openly, of course. It's all whispers and rumors, but I've overheard things. My dad is his accountant, remember? He comes home some nights looking like he's seen a ghost. He won't talk about it, but I know. Your father is in deep, Leo. Deeper than anyone knows. This marriage, it's his lifeline." My carefully constructed anger, the righteous indignation I had nurtured for 11 years, began to curdle into something else. Fear. Not for myself, but for Sarah. She wasn't just marrying a man her father approved of. She was marrying into the heart of his defense strategy. She was a beautiful, smiling shield. Did she know? Was she a willing participant, or was she as blind to the truth as I had been? Looking at her out on that dance floor, her face alight with pure joy, I knew the answer. She was oblivious. My sister was dancing at her own gilded cage's unveiling, and she thought it was a palace. "Does she have any idea?" I asked, my voice raw. "None," Chloe confirmed, shaking her head. "She's head over heels in love with Mark, and he seems to be in love with her, too. Maybe he is, or maybe he's just a very good actor, playing the part his family expects him to. Either way, Sarah sees this as her happily ever after. If she knew the truth, it would destroy her. The weight of it was crushing. I had come here to witness her happiness, and instead, I had stumbled into a conspiracy that threatened to shatter it completely. Leaving was no longer an option. Walking away now felt like a different kind of abandonment, a deeper betrayal than the first. I couldn't leave her in this beautiful, intricate lie my father had woven around her. "What do I do, Chloe?" I asked, the question feeling impossibly heavy. For the first time in 11 years, I wasn't Alex, the self-sufficient man of my own making. I was Leo, a lost boy asking for directions. "I don't know," she admitted, her grip on my arm finally loosening. "If you expose him, you ruin Sarah's life. You take away her husband, you implicate her in a federal investigation, you destroy her image of the father she adores. But if you do nothing, you let her live a lie. You let him win." Again, he had always won. Every argument, every battle of wills, every small act of rebellion in my teenage years had ended with his victory. I had thought that by leaving, by vanishing, I had finally wrested control of my own life from him. But I was wrong. His game board was just bigger than I had ever imagined, and he was still moving all the pieces, including the ones he'd supposedly thrown away. My presence here, as a ghost from his past, was a variable he hadn't accounted for. I need proof, I said, my mind starting to work, the shock giving way to a cold, hard resolve. The corporate strategist in me, the part of Alex I had honed to a razor's edge, was taking over. Whispers and rumors aren't enough. If I'm going to do anything, I need undeniable proof that he orchestrated this. Chloe looked at me, a new light in her eyes. It was a flicker of hope, maybe, or just the grim recognition of an ally. His study, she said instantly. It's always been his fortress. The one place no one was ever allowed. If there's proof anywhere, it's in there. The country club, this place of so many painful memories, was an extension of my father's world. But it wasn't his true seat of power. That was the house I grew up in. The house I had run from. The study was the heart of his empire, a wood-paneled sanctum of secrets and power plays. I knew it better than anyone. I knew the floorboard that creaked by the window, the precise way the heavy door swung shut, the smell of old leather, and his expensive cigars. The wedding reception is here, I pointed out. The house will be empty. For now, Chloe said, glancing at a large, ornate clock on the wall. But people will start heading back for the after-party in a couple of hours. The house is only a 10-minute drive from here. If you're going to do it, you have to do it now. It was insane, reckless. If I was caught, there would be no explaining my way out of it. Alex, the friend of the groom, had no reason to be breaking into the father of the bride's private study. My meticulously crafted identity would crumble, and I would be exposed. But the alternative, walking away, leaving Sarah trapped in a gilded cage, was unthinkable. How do I get in? I asked. Chloe's mouth curved into a faint conspiratorial smile. You think they changed the locks? Sarah still complains that the back door key has to be jiggled just right, the one that leads into the mudroom, and I'm guessing the spare is still in the same stupid fake rock by the rose bushes. Of course it was. My father was a man of immense ego. It would never occur to him that anyone would have the audacity to break into his home. He believed his power was a sufficient deterrent. Okay, I said, my heart starting to pound with a new, dangerous rhythm. Okay, I can do this. You'll need a distraction, Chloe said, her mind working just as fast as mine. Something to make sure no one notices you're gone, and to make sure your father stays put. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on the podium where the best man had given his speech earlier. An idea sparked in her gaze. I'm the maid of honor. I'm supposed to give a toast. I've been putting it off because I hate public speaking. But I think I'm about to give the longest, most rambling, most emotional toast in the history of weddings. She looked back at me. It'll be my masterpiece. I'll get everyone's attention, especially your parents. I'll make them cry. That should buy you at least 20 minutes. Chloe, I started, a wave of gratitude so strong it almost choked me. Just go, Leo, she said, her expression hardening with resolve. Find what you need. For Sarah. I gave her a single, sharp nod. A silent acknowledgement of the trust and the immense risk she was taking. I slipped away from the bar, melting into the throng of guests. Every nerve in my body was on fire. I kept my head down, avoiding eye contact, and made my way towards the side exit that led to the parking lot. I could hear the master of ceremonies announcing that the maid of honor was about to propose a toast. I broke into a run as soon as I hit the cool night air. My rental car was in the third row. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys. The plan was taking shape, desperate and dangerous. Get in, find the study, locate proof, and get out before anyone was the wiser. I pulled out of the country club, the tires crunching on the gravel, and sped down the winding, tree-lined road that led back to my childhood home. The 10-minute drive passed in a blur of adrenaline and dread. I pulled up a block away from the house, parking in the shadows of an overgrown hedge, and cut the engine. The house was exactly as I remembered it. A large, imposing colonial that was more of a statement than a home. It was mostly dark, save for a few lights left on upstairs, and the soft glow of the landscape lighting. It looked quiet. Empty. I crept along the side of the house, my feet silent on the soft grass. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and blooming night jasmine. I found the fake rock by the withered rose bushes, its hiding place so familiar it was instinct. My fingers closed around the cold, slick metal of the key. My heart was in my throat as I slipped it into the back door lock. It stuck, just as Chloe said it would. I jiggled it gently, and with a soft click, the lock gave way. I pushed the door open and slipped inside, closing it silently behind me. I was standing in the mudroom. The house was utterly still, the silence profound after the noise of the wedding. It smelled the same of lemon polish and my mother's potpourri. It was the smell of home, and it made my stomach clench. I moved through the darkened kitchen, my barest whisper of a footstep echoing in the cavernous space. I knew this house like the back of my hand. I reached the main hallway and turned towards my father's study. The heavy oak door was closed. I put my hand on the cold brass knob, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. The room was just as I remembered it. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive mahogany desk, and 2 leather chairs facing a cold, empty fireplace. A single desk lamp cast a pool of golden light across the polished wood surface, illuminating a stack of papers and a sleek, closed laptop. I walked straight to the desk, my eyes scanning for anything, a ledger, a folder, a strayed document. My gaze fell upon the laptop. It was modern, expensive, and almost certainly encrypted. But sitting right beside it, plugged into a USB port, was a small, silver flash drive. My father was meticulous, almost pathologically neat. He never left things lying around. He would never leave a drive plugged in unless he had just been using it. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. This could be it. The proof. The key to everything. I wrapped my hand around the cool metal and was about to pull it from the port when I heard it. A soft, almost inaudible creak. It came from the leather chair in the corner of the room, the one shrouded in shadows, its back to the door. My blood turned to ice. My breath caught in my chest. The house wasn't empty. Slowly the chair began to swivel around. A figure emerged from the darkness, a glass of scotch swirling in one hand. It was my father. He wasn't at the wedding. He was here, waiting, and on his face was a thin, cruel smile that told me one terrifying thing. He knew I was coming. "Hello, Leo." The sound of my own name, spoken in his calm, resonant voice, echoed in the dead, silent study. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, an acknowledgement of a truth he had apparently known all along. The cruel smile on his face widened, a predator's grin. He had been hunting, and his prey had just walked willingly into the trap. My mind raced, trying to process the impossible. How could he have known? Was it my conversation with Aunt Carol? Did she say something? Or was it the moment he looked into my eyes, that chilling flicker of something more than recognition? Had he seen past the man I had become and glimpsed the ghost of the son he had banished? My hand was still hovering over the flash drive, my fingers inches from the potential proof. Every instinct screamed at me to grab it and run, but my feet were bolted to the floor. I was paralyzed, caught in the beam of his unwavering gaze, just as I had been 1,000 times as a boy. "I have to admit," he continued, taking a slow, deliberate sip of his scotch, "I wasn't sure. A ghost from Chicago with your mother's eyes. It was intriguing. But I am not a man who believes in coincidences." He set his glass down on the small table beside his chair, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. "When Carol mentioned her conversation with Alex, I had my security team run the name. Imagine my surprise when they found that Alex Thorne of Chicago doesn't exist. No credit history, no social security number, no digital footprint before 3 years ago. A complete fabrication. A very good one, I'll grant you. You've been busy. My carefully constructed world, my entire identity, had been unraveled with a single phone call. I had been so focused on fooling my family that I had completely underestimated my father's resources, his inherent paranoia. He didn't just suspect, he investigated. He confirmed. And then, he went on, steepling his fingers beneath his chin, the maid of honor, a girl who has never willingly spoken in front of more than 5 people, suddenly decides to give a long, rambling, and suspiciously timed toast. It was a good plan. Touching, even. A sister's friend, protecting the long-lost brother, but a little too theatrical for my tastes. Chloe. He knew about Chloe, too. The dread in my stomach coiled into a tight, sickening knot. I had not only walked into a trap myself, but I had led her right into it with me. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice a dry rasp. "What I have always wanted, Leo," he said, his voice dropping, losing its mocking edge, and taking on a cold, hard gravity. "Order, control. I have built an empire from nothing, and I will not have it threatened by sentiment, not by a rebellious son, and not by a federal government full of petty bureaucrats who resent men of vision." He gestured towards the flash drive. "You came for this, I presume, the key to my ruin?" He let out a low chuckle, a sound devoid of any humor. Go on. Take it. It was a test. A taunt. I didn't move. You're a coward, Leo. You always have been, he sneered, his mask of civility slipping to reveal the raw contempt beneath. You ran away from your responsibilities. You ran away from this family. You ran away from me. And now you sneak back in the shadows, hoping to land a killing blow when no one is looking. You don't have the stomach for a real fight. The old rage, the one I thought I had tamed, roared to life inside me. It was a wildfire, burning through the fear and the shock. A real fight, I shot back, finding my voice. You call this a fight? Using your own daughter as a human shield? Marrying her off to the son of a judge to save your own skin? That's not a fight. That's the act of a cornered, pathetic rat. His eyes flashed with a fury that was terrifyingly familiar. He stood up, the full force of his presence filling the room. He was taller than I remembered, or maybe I had just been a boy then. Now we stood eye to eye. She is my daughter, he hissed, taking a step towards the desk, towards me. She will do her duty to this family, just as you should have. She understands loyalty. It's a concept you never could grasp. You mean obedience, I countered, standing my ground. Sarah isn't loyal, she's blinded by a lie. She thinks you love her, but you don't love anything that you can't control. And you think you can save her. He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. By showing her that flash drive. What's on it, Leo? Bank records, shell corporations, shady deals. Do you think she'll understand any of it? All she will see is her brother, the one who abandoned her for 11 years, returning to destroy her father and ruin her marriage. Who do you think she will choose? The loving father who has been by her side every day, or the ghost who brought a hurricane to her wedding day? He was right. The terrible, sickening truth of his words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had been so focused on the what the proof that I hadn't considered the how. If I revealed the truth, I wouldn't be her savior. I would be the villain of her story, the monster who tore her perfect world apart. My father hadn't just laid a trap for me. He had constructed a perfect checkmate. No matter which way I moved, Sarah would be the one to pay the price. My resolve crumbled, replaced by a wave of crushing despair. He had won. He had already won. I looked from the flash drive to my father's triumphant face, and I felt a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. I had been fighting this war for 11 years, and I hadn't even known the shape of the battlefield. It's over, I whispered, more to myself than to him. I had to go. Disappear again, for good this time. Let Sarah live in her gilded cage. At least she was happy there. Ignorance was a mercy I could no longer afford, but perhaps I could still leave it for her. I backed away from the desk, turning my back on the flash drive, on the fight, on him. I took a step towards the door. Oh, I don't think so, my father said, his voice dangerously calm. You don't get to run this time. You're not a 16-year-old boy anymore, and I'm not going to let a loose end like you wander around my world. You made a choice when you walked into this house tonight. I turned back to face him, a cold premonition snaking its way up my spine. He was no longer smiling. His face was a cold, granite mask of implacable resolve. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he was pulling out a weapon. But instead he produced his phone. With a few taps of his thumb, he placed a call. It's done, he said into the phone, his eyes locked on mine. Bring them in. My blood ran cold. Bring who in? I demanded, my voice shaking. He didn't answer me. He simply disconnected the call and slid the phone back into his pocket. A moment later, I heard the sound of the front door of the house opening. Heavy footsteps echoed in the marble entryway, followed by voices. One was my mother, her tone high and frantic. What is the meaning of this? Who are you? Get out of my house. Then, another voice, calmer, but with a chilling authority. Ma'am, please remain calm. We have a warrant. The footsteps grew closer, stopping just outside the study door. My father walked calmly around the desk and opened the door. Standing in the hallway were two men in dark suits, their faces grim and professional, and behind them, her face pale with shock and confusion, was my mother. Her eyes darted around the hallway, finally landing on the open study door. They widened as she saw me. Her breath hitched, a hand flying to her mouth. Leo, she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. One of the suited men stepped forward, his eyes fixed not on my father, but on me. He held up a badge. Alex Thorne, the man said, his voice flat and official. He was looking right at me. You're under arrest for corporate espionage and the theft of proprietary data from Sterling Financial. My mind blanked. Sterling Financial. It was my father's company. I stared at him, bewildered, as the second man stepped forward, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "What are you talking about?" I stammered. "I don't—" "The flash drive," my father said, a look of utter triumph on his face. He picked it up from the desk and held it out to the lead agent. "You'll find everything you need right here. My son, Leo, unfortunately passed away years ago. This man is an imposter, a corporate spy who broke into my home to steal my company's secrets. Luckily, I caught him in the act." The click of the handcuffs ratcheting around my wrists was a sound of absolute finality. It was cold, metallic, and real. The agents, efficient and impersonal, recited my rights in a monotone drone that barely registered over the roaring in my ears. I was being framed. It was a move of such breathtaking audacity, such cold-blooded genius, that I could only stare at my father in stunned silence. He hadn't just laid a trap. He had authored my destruction. He was using the very legal system he was trying to evade to eliminate me, painting me as the criminal to neutralize the evidence I had come to find. "Richard, what is happening?" My mother's voice was a fragile thread in the heavy silence. She stumbled into the study, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and utter confusion, darting between me and my father. It's Leo. Our Leo. He's alive." Her voice broke on my name, a decade of repressed grief and hope crashing into a single, devastating moment. "Helen, stay back," my father commanded, his voice sharp and devoid of any warmth. He put a hand on her arm, not to comfort her, but to restrain her. "This is not Leo. Leo is gone. This is a criminal who broke into our home. He has my son's eyes, that is all. A cruel coincidence." "No!" she cried, pulling away from him, her gaze locked on mine. "I know my own son." She took a hesitant step towards me, her face a canvas of disbelief and dawning recognition. "Leo, is it really you?" Before I could answer, one of the agents gently but firmly steered me towards the door. "Let's go, sir." "Wait," I said, twisting to face my mother, to make her see, to make her understand. "Mom, it's me. It really is. Don't listen to him. He's lying." My father stepped between us, blocking her view of me. "Helen, you are distraught. The shock of the break-in, the resemblance. It's overwhelming you. The police will handle this." He turned to the agents. "Get him out of here. My wife is not well." He was gaslighting her in real time, using her emotional state, her decade of grief, as a weapon against her own senses. I saw the doubt flicker in her eyes, the confusion warring with maternal instinct. She looked from her husband's cold, commanding face to the stranger in handcuffs being led from her home. Who was she to believe? The man who had stood by her for 30 years, or the ghost who had just materialized in a nightmare? As they pulled me from the study, I caught one last glimpse of her face, lost and heartbroken. The agents led me through the grand entryway, past the sweeping staircase where Sarah and I used to slide down the banister, past the family portraits on the wall where my face was conspicuously absent. The life I had run from was now swallowing me whole. Outside, the cool night air was a shock. A black, unmarked car was parked in the driveway. The fairy lights from Sarah's wedding were still visible through the trees, a distant, mocking twinkle. My sister was dancing, oblivious, while her brother was being arrested on the front steps of their childhood home. They pushed my head down and bundled me into the back of the car. The door slammed shut with a heavy thud, sealing me in darkness. Through the window, I saw my father standing on the porch, a silhouette of absolute power. My mother a fragile shape beside him. He had won. Utterly. I had walked back into his world, and he had simply erased me all over again, this time with the full force of the law. The drive was silent. The agents didn't speak. I was just a body in the back of their car, a problem to be processed. My mind was a chaotic storm. Chloe. What would happen to Chloe? My father knew she was involved. Would he go after her too? And Sarah? What would they tell Sarah? That a stranger who looked like her dead brother had tried to rob them on her wedding night? The thought of the pain and confusion that lie would cause her was a fresh kind of agony. We arrived at a downtown federal building, a sterile, imposing structure of glass and steel. They led me through a series of anonymous corridors to a small, windowless interrogation room. There was a metal table, 3 chairs, and a two-way mirror on one wall. It was exactly like the ones on TV, only the reality of it was suffocating. They left me there, my hands cuffed to a metal ring on the table. The minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the cold, stark reality of my situation. I was a ghost. Alex Thorne was a fiction. I had no ID that would stand up to scrutiny, no alibi, no one to call. My one phone call would be useless. Who would I even contact? Chloe? That would only implicate her further. Finally, the door opened. It wasn't the agents who had arrested me. It was a man in a slightly rumpled suit, carrying a worn leather briefcase. He looked more like a tired academic than a federal prosecutor. He sat down opposite me, placing the briefcase on the table but not opening it. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney David Chen," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "And you, son, are in a world of trouble." He slid a file across the table. My name, Alex Thorne, was on the tab. "Your father has provided us with a mountain of evidence. Server logs showing unauthorized access from an IP address traced to a burner phone you purchased. Security footage of you casing his office building. Financial records showing large payments into an untraceable crypto account. It's a very neat, very compelling story." "It's a lie," I said, my voice hoarse. "Every word of it is a lie." He framed me. Chen sighed, leaning back in his chair. He looked tired. "Everyone we arrest says that. But your father, he's a pillar of the community, a philanthropist, a captain of industry. And you? We can't find a single record of your existence before 3 years ago. You look like a ghost, a spy. You fit the profile perfectly. A jury will eat it up." Desperation clawed at my throat. "I'm his son," I insisted. "My name is Leo Sterling. I ran away 11 years ago. He disowned me. He's being investigated by the SEC, and he's framing me to discredit any information I might have against him." Chen listened patiently, his expression unchanging. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Let me tell you what I think," he said. "I think your father is as corrupt as a $3 bill. I've been part of the team building a case against him for 2 years. He's slippery. He covers his tracks. Every time we think we have him, the evidence disappears, or a witness recants." A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. "So you believe me?" "I believe," Chen said, his eyes hard, "that you are the unluckiest son of a bitch I have ever met. You walked right into the kill box. We can't touch your father with what we have. He's too insulated. But you, he can sacrifice. By turning you in, by painting you as the villain, he makes himself look like the victim. He generates goodwill. He makes our investigation look like a politically motivated witch hunt against a man who just had his home invaded. He's not just getting rid of you, he's using you to discredit us." The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. I was just another pawn on the board, a piece to be sacrificed for a larger strategy. "So that's it?" I asked, the fight draining out of me. "I go to prison for him." "Most likely," Chen said with brutal honesty. "His lawyers are the best money can buy. Our evidence against you, fabricated or not, is rock solid. Your story is unbelievable. A ghost son returning on the night of his sister's wedding. It sounds like a bad movie." He paused, studying my face intently. Unless you have something we don't. Something that ties him directly to the SEC case. Not just corporate malfeasance, but something concrete, something undeniable." My mind went blank. The flash drive. The proof I had come for was now evidence against me. My father had turned my own weapon against me. I had nothing. Chen seemed to read the despair on my face. He sighed and stood up, grabbing his briefcase. "I thought so. Well, a public defender will be appointed for you in the morning. Try to get some sleep." He started for the door, and my last shred of hope started to walk out with him. My mind was screaming, scrambling for something, anything, a detail, a memory, a piece of leverage. And then it came to me, a memory from my last day at home, a furious argument in the study. My father yelling, waving a sheaf of papers in my face. Something about an offshore account, a failsafe. He had called it the Elysium account. I had been 16. I hadn't understood. But now... "Wait," I said, my voice cracking. Chen stopped, his hand on the doorknob, and turned back. "The Elysium account," I said, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "In the Cayman Islands. It's his personal piggy bank, the one he uses to hide the money he skims from the company, the money the SEC can't find." Chen's tired eyes suddenly sharpened. He walked slowly back to the table and sat down, his gaze boring into me. He didn't say anything, but I could see the gears turning in his head. This was a name he hadn't heard before, a thread he hadn't known to pull. "How would you know about that?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "He told me," I said. "A long time ago. He was screaming at me, telling me I was throwing away an inheritance, a future of absolute security. He said the Elysium account was the family's real nest egg, completely untouchable, completely off the books. Chen was silent for a long, agonizing moment. He was weighing it. Was this the desperate fabrication of a guilty man, or the one piece of truth that could crack the whole case wide open? Finally, he leaned forward, a new, dangerous light in his eyes. "Okay, Leo," he said, using my real name for the first time. "Let's say I believe you. Let's say this account exists. It's in the Caymans. It's untouchable. We can't subpoena their banks. Knowing the name is useless without the account numbers, the access codes. And your father is not going to just hand them over." He paused, letting the impossibility of the situation sink in. There is only one other person who would have that information. A cold, terrifying realization dawned on me. My father was a narcissist, but he wasn't a fool. He would have a contingency, a backup. Someone else who could access the funds if something happened to him. Someone he trusted implicitly. Someone who would have no idea what they truly held. His lawyer? I guessed, my heart sinking. Chen shook his head slowly. Too obvious. Your father doesn't trust anyone that much. He leaned in even closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The kind of man who builds a secret, offshore empire like that. He'd keep the keys close. He'd hide them in the last place anyone would ever think to look. He paused, his eyes locked on mine. He'd give them to your mother. My mother. The thought was a paradox, a collision of two irreconcilable realities. My mother, the gentle, fragile woman who arranged flowers and hosted charity luncheons, was the unwitting gatekeeper to my father's criminal empire. It was a move of pure, diabolical genius. She was the perfect vault, completely loyal, utterly unsuspecting, and the one person no one would ever think to question. She probably thought it was just a life insurance policy or a rainy day fund, a series of numbers and passwords tucked away in a safe deposit box for an emergency she could never imagine. She wouldn't know what it is, I said, the words tumbling out. He would have hidden it in plain sight, disguised it as something mundane. He would have given her a sealed envelope to be opened only in the event of his death. She would guard it with her life, never dreaming of its contents. Exactly, Chen said, a grim satisfaction in his eyes. He saw the path forward, a narrow, treacherous tightrope walk. She's the key, but she's also his wife. Right now, her son, or a man who looks exactly like him, has just been arrested for trying to ruin her husband. Her loyalty is with him. She's unreachable. The brief surge of hope I'd felt curdled into a new kind of despair. We had identified the lock, but the key was in the hands of someone who would never willingly give it to us. My mother had been conditioned for 30 years to trust my father, to believe in the world he had built around her. My reappearance, followed by my immediate arrest, would only reinforce her dependence on him. I was the chaos. He was her stability. "So we're back to square one," I said, the metal of the cuffs cold against my skin. "We can't get to her." "Not while you're in here, no," Chen agreed. He stood up and began to pace the small room, his mind clearly working, processing angles. "Right now you're Alex Thorne, corporate spy. But if you were Leo Sterling, the wronged son, that's a different narrative. It's a harder story for your father to control." "And how do I prove that?" I asked bitterly. "He's declared me dead for a decade. My birth certificate is just a piece of paper." "DNA doesn't lie," Chen said, stopping his pacing to look at me. "We get a warrant for your mother's DNA, a simple cheek swab. We match it to yours. It won't happen overnight, but it will legally establish you as her son. It punches the first hole in your father's story. It changes you from a random criminal into his flesh and blood. It was a start, a small foothold in an avalanche, but it still didn't solve the bigger problem. Even if you prove I'm Leo," I said, "she'll still see me as the son who betrayed her husband, the one who brought this all down on their heads. She'll hate me." "Maybe," Chen conceded. "Or maybe, just maybe, seeing irrefutable proof that her husband lied about her son being dead for 11 years might plant a seed of doubt. It might make her question what other lies he's told." He walked back to the table and leaned on it, his face close to mine. "But you're right. It's not enough. We need more. We need to get a message to her. Something that only the real Leo would know. Something that bypasses your father's narrative and speaks directly to her heart." My mind raced through a Rolodex of childhood memories, shared secrets, inside jokes, moments of tenderness. But my father knew most of those stories too. He could twist them, dismiss them as details a clever spy had researched. I needed something he couldn't touch, something that was uniquely, profoundly ours. And then it hit me. a memory so deeply buried in pain and love that I hadn't thought of it in years. The snowdrops, I whispered. The memory so vivid I could almost feel the cold. Chen raised an eyebrow. Snowdrops? When I was 8, our golden retriever, Rusty, got sick, I explained, my voice thick with emotion. He was my best friend. The vet said there was nothing they could do. I was devastated. I refused to leave his side. The night before we had to let him go, my mom came into my room. She told me a story about how the bravest souls don't really leave. They just change form. She said they come back in the first flowers of spring, the snowdrops, pushing up through the frozen ground to remind us that life always returns. The next spring, she planted a whole bed of them under the old oak tree in the backyard. Every year, she'd take me out to see them, and she'd say, "Look, Leo, Rusty's saying hello." It was a silly, childish story, but it was our ritual, a secret language of grief and hope. My father had hated the dog, and had dismissed the whole thing as sentimental nonsense. He wouldn't even remember. But my mother, she would. "That's good," Chen said softly, a flicker of something that looked like compassion in his eyes. "That's very good." He pulled a pen and a small notepad from his pocket. "Tell me exactly what to say." As I dictated the message, a plan began to form in Chen's eyes, a high-stakes gamble. "My office is going to release a statement to the press tomorrow morning," he said, scribbling furiously, "announcing the arrest of Alex Thorne. We'll leak that the suspect is claiming to be the long-lost Sterling's son. The media will go into a frenzy. It'll be a circus." "How does that help?" I asked. "Because your father will have to respond," Chen explained. "He'll hold a press conference. He'll stand in front of the cameras with his grieving wife by his side, and he will double down on his story. He will talk about the tragedy of losing his son and the pain of having this impostor exploit his family's grief." He looked up from his notepad, his eyes glinting. "And my mole inside the DA's office will make sure one friendly reporter gets to ask your mother a question. A very specific question." I understood immediately. In the middle of that carefully staged performance, a reporter would ask her, "Mrs. Sterling, the suspect has a message he claims only your real son would understand. He asks if you remember who says hello in the snowdrops." It was a grenade. If she broke, if she showed even a flicker of recognition, the narrative would shatter. If she held firm, we were lost. Everything hinged on a mother's memory and a bed of flowers planted 2 decades ago. "It's a long shot," Chen admitted, tucking the notepad away. "But it's the only one we've got." He stood up, his demeanor all business again. "I'm going to get the ball rolling on the DNA warrant. You just sit tight. The next 24 hours are going to be interesting." He left, and I was alone again in the silence. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was filled with a fragile, terrifying hope. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting. We were fighting back. Hours later, 2 guards came for me. They didn't take me back to the interrogation room. They led me down a different set of corridors to a small, private conference room. When the door opened, my breath caught in my throat. A man in an expensive suit stood up as I entered. He was in his late 50s with a kind face and tired eyes. "Leo," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm Howard Vance. I'm your attorney." I stared at him, confused. "I don't understand. Chen said I'd get a public defender." "You did," Vance said with a small smile. "But your retainer was just paid. In full. An anonymous wire transfer from an offshore account." He slid a piece of paper across the polished table. It was a receipt for his services. My eyes scanned the details, my mind struggling to catch up. An anonymous donor? Who? And then I saw it. A single line item in the transfer details, a reference note, clearly meant for me to see. It was just one word. A name. Chloe. She hadn't just bought me time with a toast. She was fighting for me from the outside, risking everything. A wave of gratitude and terror washed over me. She was tying herself to me, to this sinking ship. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "What's happening?" "A lot," he said, his expression turning serious. "The U.S. Attorney's Office is moving for a DNA test. Your father's legal team is trying to block it, claiming it's a violation of your mother's privacy. And the press, well, the press is having a field day. Your father has scheduled a press conference for noon tomorrow at his home." It was all happening, just as Chen had predicted. The pieces were moving. "There's something else," Vance said, his gaze becoming more intense. "Something you need to see." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a tablet. He tapped the screen a few times and then turned it to face me. It was a news article from a local financial blog, published just an hour ago. The headline made the air leave my lungs. Sterling Financial announces emergency board meeting. Mark Adler, son-in-law of CEO, appointed interim COO. Mark, I whispered. It seems your brother-in-law is making a power play, Vance said grimly. In the wake of the break-in and the ensuing media circus, the board is getting nervous. Adler is positioning himself to take control, citing the need for stable leadership in a time of crisis. He looked me straight in the eye. Leo, whatever your father is doing, it's not just about the SEC anymore. He's being attacked from the inside. His own hand-picked successor is staging a coup. The news of Mark's power play was a strategic earthquake. It changed the entire landscape. My father, the master puppeteer, was suddenly fighting a war on two fronts, against the federal government and against the very man he had chosen to be his shield. Mark wasn't just a pawn, he was a player. He had seen a moment of weakness, a crack in the foundation of my father's empire, and he was moving to exploit it. The wedding wasn't just a shield for my father, it was a Trojan horse for Mark. He's using the chaos I created, I said, a slow dawning realization spreading through me. He's leveraging my arrest to paint my father as unstable, as a liability to the company. Precisely, Vance confirmed. And he's doing it with the board's blessing. Your father is cornered. He's planned for every external threat, but he never saw the one he invited into his own family. This changed everything. My father's press conference at noon was no longer just about discrediting me. It was about saving his company. He would have to project an image of absolute strength and control, not just for the public, but for his board of directors. He couldn't afford a single crack in his composure. And we were about to hand him a sledgehammer. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. Vance briefed me on legal strategies, but we both knew the real battle wouldn't be fought in a courtroom. It would be fought live, on national television, on the manicured front lawn of my childhood home. Chen Vance and I were a remote command center for an emotional bomb, and my mother was standing at ground zero. At noon, a guard wheeled a small television into the conference room. Vance tuned it to a national news channel. The screen filled with the image of my home. It was a media circus. Dozens of reporters and camera crews were crammed onto the lawn, all pointing their lenses at a podium set up in front of the familiar white columns of the porch. And then he appeared. My father, looking immaculate in a dark, severe suit. He was the picture of gravitas and control, and on his arm, looking pale, fragile, and utterly broken, was my mother. She wore a simple black dress, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. Seeing her like that, a prop in his desperate theater, ignited a protective fury in me so intense it made my hands tremble. He began to speak, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. He spoke of his family's pain, the violation of their home, the cruel opportunism of a disturbed individual exploiting their past tragedy. He was magnificent. He was a liar of Shakespearean proportion. He painted a portrait of a grieving father protecting his fragile wife from a world of horrors. My son, Leo, was a bright, beautiful, but troubled boy, he said, his voice catching with feigned emotion. We lost him 11 years ago. A day doesn't go by that we don't feel that loss. And for this criminal to try and wear his face, to try and usurp his memory for financial gain, it is the most despicable act I have ever witnessed. He was building an unassailable wall of sympathy. I could feel the narrative cementing in the public mind. Then it happened. Chen's friendly reporter, a young woman near the front, was given the floor. "Mr. Sterling, your wife has been through so much." "Mrs. Sterling," she said, directing her question to my mother, her voice gentle but clear. "The suspect, who claims to be your son, has a message. He asked us to ask you. Do you remember who says hello in the snowdrops?" Silence. A complete, deafening silence fell over the lawn. The other reporters looked confused, but my father... He froze. For the first time, a flicker of genuine panic crossed his face. It was a detail he didn't know, a variable he couldn't control. He tightened his grip on my mother's arm, a subtle, warning pressure. My mother stood motionless for a beat. Then, slowly, shakily, she lifted a hand and removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, but they were clear. She wasn't looking at the reporter. She was looking straight into the camera, as if she could see me through the lens. Her lips trembled. A single tear traced a path down her pale cheek. "Rusty," she whispered. The microphone on the podium was so sensitive it picked up the sound. The name, my dog's name, hung in the air, a ghost of a memory made real. My father's face contorted in a mask of fury. He tried to lean in, to whisper to her, to regain control, but it was too late. The dam had broken. "My boy," she said, her voice growing stronger, a mother's fierce certainty cutting through the grief. "My Leo, he's alive." It was pandemonium. Reporters started shouting questions all at once. My father, his face ashen, grabbed my mother's arm and tried to pull her back into the house, away from the cameras, but she stood her ground. She had made her choice. In that one brief shining moment, she had chosen her son over her husband. In the conference room, I was on my feet, my heart pounding. Vance was clapping me on the shoulder. It had worked. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it had bloomed into a rebellion. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for my father. The DNA test was fast-tracked. The match was confirmed within days. The story exploded. Billionaire industrialist lied for a decade about his son's death. The SEC investigation, once a quiet rumor, became front-page news. Mark Adler, seizing the moment, called an emergency vote of no confidence. My father was ousted from the company he had built. Chen used the public leverage to offer him a deal. A full confession and cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. His empire was crumbling. His successor had betrayed him. His wife had turned against him. Cornered and alone, he took the deal. The Elysium account was the final nail in his coffin. The details of his corruption, laid bare, were even worse than we had imagined. I was released. All charges dropped. The man known as Alex Thorne ceased to exist. Leo Sterling, however, had the strange and difficult task of being reborn. The first person I saw when I walked out of the federal building was Chloe. She didn't run to me or say anything dramatic. She just stood there, leaning against her car, and gave me a small, exhausted smile. "Took you long enough," she said. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. My reunion with my mother was quiet and tearful, held in the sterile living room of a hotel suite. She held my hands, her touch both familiar and foreign, and traced the lines on my face, trying to reconcile the man before her with the boy she had lost. There were years of pain and questions between us, a chasm that would take a long time to bridge. But for the first time in over a decade, we were in the same room, and the truth was on our side. That was a start. Sarah was the hardest. Her world had been incinerated. Her husband was a ruthless opportunist, her father a convicted felon, and her brother a ghost returned from the dead to light the match. She refused to see me for weeks. When she finally did, it was with cold, angry eyes. She blamed me for everything. I didn't defend myself. I just listened. I let her yell. I let her cry. I absorbed the full force of her grief and rage. I had missed 11 years of her life. I owed her at least that. The months that followed were a slow, painful process of rebuilding. My father went to prison. Mark Adler, the new CEO of Sterling Financial, found himself under intense scrutiny and eventually resigned under a cloud of his own scandals. The company was restructured and sold off in pieces. My mother, with a quiet strength I had never seen in her, divorced my father and started building a life of her own. I didn't stay. There were too many ghosts in that city for me. Chloe and I, our old friendship rekindling into something new and deeper, decided to start fresh somewhere else. We found a small town by the sea, a place where no one knew the names Sterling or Thorne. A place where I could just be Leo. One chilly morning in early spring, I walked out into the small garden behind our new house. The ground was still hard, but pushing their way up through the cold earth were the first brave blossoms of the year. They were small, white, and perfect. Snowdrops. Chloe came out and stood beside me, wrapping her arm around mine. We stood there in the quiet morning air, watching them. It wasn't an ending. The scars were still there. The past was still part of us. But for the first time, it felt like it was behind us. It was a new season, a new life, pushing its way towards the sun. It was a hello,